I was always working. Right after the season, whether we won the Super Bowl or not, I would take 2 weeks off and go right back to training. Wasn't the most physical or the fastest receiver in the NFL, but they never clocked me on the way to the end zone.
When it comes to the NFL GOAT, or the #1 football player of all time, it's really tough in football to decide on one individual player. With how many positions there are, trying to compare different sides of the ball or even just any two different positions makes it hard to put players ahead of others. So while the GOAT debate isn't really the easiest thing to decide on, when it comes to players who stand out above the all-time competition at their position on the field, Jerry Rice stands out by far as the greatest receiver to ever do it, and his stats and NFL records will never be topped. Never. Jerry Rice is one of the greatest players in NFL history, and his receiving records will never ever be broken. But why not? Jerry Rice's tattoo says it all. Jerry Rice dominated the position from start to finish of his career. From over 1,500 yards and 15 touchdowns in just his second year in the league, to making the Pro Bowl and going to the Super Bowl at 40 years old. Jerry dominated for 20 seasons like no other receiver ever. When you think about NFL receiving records, this man's name appears at the top of every one. Today, we're going to look at the 3 major receiving categories and try to figure out how one man has managed to own all of them in the record books, and how they will never be taken from him. When it comes to receivers, what 3 stats do we mostly measure them by? Receptions, yards, and touchdowns. Anytime you hear a receiver being talked about, you hear those 3 words in the discussion. Those 3 stats truly measure a receiver's production. So when we look at who has the most production in these categories all time, somehow, some way, Jerry Rice owns all 3 categories. Jerry Rice finished his remarkable 20-year NFL career with a whopping 1,549 receptions for 22,985 yards and 197 receiving touchdowns. Jesus Christ. Imagine having career averages of 77 catches, 1,150 yards, and 10 touchdowns a year for 20 years. And that's on top of having his last couple years playing at over 40 years old, weighing down his averages, as well as having a season where he only played 2 games. I mean, this guy's numbers are just astonishing. No one will ever top his numbers, and here's why. First of all, his receiving touchdowns. 197 of them to be exact. When you think about a player having over 100 career touchdowns, that's a huge milestone, but 200 is something else. The fact that he averaged just about 10 touchdowns a year for 20 years is just... So, if we look at the list of career receiving touchdowns, Rice is 41 ahead of the next man on this list, Randy Moss, who has 156 but is obviously retired as we know, so he won't be adding to that. The closest active player is Larry Fitzgerald, who is 61 touchdowns away. So unless Larry plans on drinking from a real life fountain of youth, then I don't think he'll be passing Rice. Looking down the list a bit further, and the next possible player with more than a couple years left in the league most likely is Antonio Brown. Antonio Brown has put up some pretty big numbers and still definitely has a few great years left in him, but even with his great career thus far, he only has 74 receiving touchdowns in 9 years. So even if Antonio Brown manages to stay at the same average production for another 9 years in the league, which I mean, I highly doubt he plays 18 years total, but even if he does, he would be at around 150 receiving touchdowns at that rate, and that's still almost 50 short of Jerry Rice. It's just not happening. Jerry cemented himself at the top forever. Jerry averaged about 0.6 touchdowns per game, or just under 10 a season, and had 9 seasons with at least 10 receiving touchdowns. But there is a case for solving the reason why every player trails him on this list. If you look at the next 2 receivers in receiving touchdowns, you'll find Randy Moss and Terrell Owens. But if you really look at the touchdown numbers, Moss and T.O. actually have a better per game and season average. Wild, right? While Jerry Rice averaged 0.6 touchdowns per game, Moss and Owens averaged over 0.7. What does this mean? Well, Moss and Owens only played for 15 years and Rice played for 20. So if Moss and Owens could have played 5 more years at their average numbers, they would have each put up around 215 to 220 career receiving touchdowns. But the truth is, if you look at how both of these guys left the league, then you'd know that playing another 5 years wasn't an option. After Moss's 13th season, he spent his next 2 years bouncing between teams and retirement before calling it quits for good. So it's hard to say Moss really had much game left, especially considering in his last official season, he had 434 receiving yards and 3 touchdowns. On to T.O. T.O., well, it's hard to imagine NFL teams putting up with this guy's personality for 20 seasons. I mean, that's not that hard to imagine, but he did basically beg for a team to sign him for about 5 years after he stopped playing, and with the numbers that he had before he left, it's kind of hard to argue with him. At the age of 37 years old, T.O. managed to have 983 yards and 9 touchdowns for the Bengals, but that ended up being his last season in the league. In simple terms, his career ended after him tearing his ACL at age 37. I mean, who wants to pick up a 38-year-old receiver coming off an ACL surgery? Combine that with the fact that T.O. basically ruined every team's chemistry and player-team relationship with every team he went to. Combining those things, it's not hard to add up why T.O. had no chance of playing 20 years in the league. If you're trying to say that Jerry's only number 1 because he just played more seasons and games, just take a second and realize that Jerry Rice would have still been number 1 all time in receiving touchdowns if he had retired after his 14th season. His last couple seasons weighed down his career averages a bit, but he was still ahead of Moss's and T.O.'s pace at their age. Jerry Rice had incredible longevity and managed to play 20 seasons as a productive receiver. Just makes him stand out among all others. Picturing an elite NFL wide receiver playing 20 full years nowadays just seems kind of insane. Even Larry Fitzgerald has only played 15 years in the league, and it seems like he's been around since the NFL started. There's just no chance an NFL receiver performs at such an elite level for 20 years ever again. This NFL receiving touchdown record will never be broken. Oh, and by the way, Jerry Rice also has the NFL record for total touchdowns over any running back as well. He ended his career with 208 total touchdowns, but if you think about it, usually running backs end up with more touchdowns than a receiver, right? I mean, running backs usually end up with plenty of rushing touchdowns to go along with some complementing receiving touchdowns, right? Well, in 2018, only 3 wide receivers were in the top 10 in the league in touchdowns. So it's crazy to say Jerry Rice is number 1 in total touchdowns over running backs like Emmitt Smith and LaDainian Tomlinson. He was just better for longer and holds almost a 100 touchdown lead on the next active player. It's safe to say Jerry Rice's touchdown records will stand for a long time. Next up, we have receiving yards. 22,985 of them. Goddamn. Once again, when it comes to receiving yards, you think about 10,000 career yards and you think, wow, that's a pretty good milestone. But 20,000? That's just insane. The fact Jerry Rice had over 22,000 yards still blows my mind every time I look at it. It's just never going to be topped. If a player could somehow manage to average 1,500 yards per season for 15 seasons, he would still be short of topping Jerry Rice. It's just not possible. The second most receiving yards in NFL history, Larry Fitzgerald, is still over 6,000 yards behind. Yeah, that's not gonna happen. As for an active player with the chance of beating it one day, well, Julio Jones has the best chance of any active player. In only 8 seasons, Julio has managed to rack up 10,731 receiving yards with an insane average of over 1,340 yards per season. Julio Jones actually averages over 20 more yards per game than Jerry Rice did for his career. The sad part though is that Jones would have to keep up this pace for 9 more years and still be just short of Rice's record. This is just not fair. I mean, 9 more years would make Julio 38 years old and still hauling in over 1,300 yards a year. I don't buy it. I don't see Jones playing this long due to, if nothing else, his size and history of small injuries maybe adding up over the years, but basically, no matter how you cut it, I just don't see this guy playing 9 more seasons. I just don't. There is actually 6 active players after Julio Jones that average more yards per game over their career than Rice, but I'll bet you that none of them can keep that pace up for a minimum of 17 years. I can't imagine a receiver ever even crossing 20,000 career receiving yards anytime soon. It's just too unattainable. Not to mention, once again, that Jerry Rice leads NFL history in not only receiving yards, but also total yards from scrimmage, which is another stat primarily dominated by NFL running backs. Jerry Rice sits at number 1 with 24,540 yards from scrimmage, about 2,000 more than 2 legends in Emmitt Smith and Barry Sanders. Not to mention, Rice is the only player in the top 10 of yards from scrimmage all time that is not a running back. This man not only dominated his position, but also stands out over the greatest running backs of all time as well. I just can't picture a running back or a wide receiver staying productive for over 15 years anymore. It's just not as popular. No one can stay that good for that long at wide receiver or running back. Jerry's yardages will never be broken. It's just too far-fetched for any player to ever accomplish those numbers again. Last up, we have Jerry Rice's 1,549 career receptions. Once again, just an unbelievable number to think about. Second place is Tony Gonzalez, or most likely soon to be Larry Fitzgerald. Either way, both of them are still over 200 catches short. Seeing Larry have more than 200 receptions seems unlikely unless he really comes back again after this upcoming season, and then would probably have to play another season on top of that. I mean, just thinking you could have 15 100 reception seasons and still not be on top is crazy. Looking to a man on pace for around these numbers though, once again, is Antonio Brown. Antonio Brown has had 6 straight seasons of over 100 catches and averages 93 receptions per year since he began his pro career. Rice only averaged about 77 catches per season, so the pace is there for AB for sure. If Brown could manage to have 7 more 100 catch seasons, he would be right there knocking on the door, but the chances of AB having a total of 13 straight 100 reception seasons, especially expecting 3 of those years to be at age 35 or older, it seems possible but unlikely. With how pass happy the NFL is nowadays, and with receptions being an obvious number that will be higher with more pass attempts, I can see how some people could say that this record will eventually get broken, but the way the NFL teams have just so many weapons nowadays and end up spreading the ball around pretty good, it's hard to think that one man could manage to be the number one option on the offense from day one for over 15 years. Once again, no one will be able to top the bar that Jerry Rice set, and his career receptions record will not be broken either. To be able to be the primary option for so many years on end just speaks to Jerry's amazing and almost crazy work ethic. He modeled his entire career on just outworking every single person on the planet, and well, it worked out. Jerry just wanted to be the best so bad he would never settle for anything less. I mean, his nickname literally became the GOAT. What more can you say? Besides his amazing record-breaking career numbers, 13 Pro Bowls, 10 first-team All-Pro selections, 3 Super Bowl rings, and 1 Super Bowl MVP, doesn't look so bad either. Oh yeah, and he also has the most career receptions, yards, and touchdowns in the Super Bowl, as well as having scored 3 touchdowns in 2 different Super Bowls and having a total of 8 touchdowns in only 4 games. In case you were wondering about his postseason resume, if you still had any doubts. Now, for those of you that may just try to contribute Jerry's unbreakable records to his very lengthy career, or maybe the fact that he played for 2 Hall of Fame quarterbacks, I don't want to hear it. A 20-year career just means he was so good that he was still wanted in the league and his body was in good enough shape to stay. He was just better for longer. It's that simple. And as for him playing for 2 Hall of Fame quarterbacks, I mean, I hope people really don't think that tarnishes his name in any way. First of all, Jerry was very used to Joe Montana, and when Steve Young took over, Jerry had to completely mesh with the new quarterback, not to mention a lefty. Jerry not only got adjusted fast, but also ended up getting more touchdown receptions from Young than Montana. So this speaks to Jerry's work ethic and ability to make adjustments throughout his career. Also, if people are gonna say, oh, he played with 2 Hall of Fame quarterbacks, then why can't it ever be looked at the other way? What if both the quarterbacks were only so good because they had the best receiver of all time to throw it to? Now, I'm not saying that's the case, but I'm just saying you can't discredit Jerry for playing with great quarterbacks. I mean, what was he gonna do, leave the team? No matter how you look at it, Jerry Rice is the greatest. His name will forever be relevant because no one will ever be able to fill in his footprints. There will never be a receiver as good for as long as Jerry Rice was, and his name will be cemented in the record books forever. His receiving records are just unbreakable and he will never be passed. Hope you guys enjoyed this video and let me know what you guys want to see next. Don't forget to subscribe if you want to see more content, and I'll catch you guys next time. Peace.